Sean Fitz, welcome to the show. Excited for today. Ryan Snyder is being a dad. He has to attend kindergarten graduation. Fitz, I have to admit, I did not graduate from kindergarten.
I believe that based on your previous pronunciation of kindergarten, as I think I heard kindergarten in there.
I got it the second time.
I know where you're from, so you made it far enough, buddy. Good job.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Today's show, we're talking about the things I think Penn State fans want to know. Here's the deal. Fitz does a lot of great work at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. He does a lot of reporting, and just like knowing him and knowing Ryan, they want to have facts to come here and tell you. They want to give you the news, but every once in a while, I want to push them out of their comfort zone and just take all that information and what do you think? So we're doing a gut check on the class of 2027, some of the burning topics that fans want to know every single time we're here live. I'm going to be asking Fitz those questions on today's show. We're also going to get to your questions in the BWI Mailbag. So if there's something that you want to know, you have your favorite topic you want to discuss and we don't bring it up, make sure you drop it in the live chat. We'll be answering it during the mailbag. But today, Fitz, we have to start off with some Penn State football recruiting news. And it's not good for Penn State football, but I'm going to ask you, is it as bad as it sounds? Carter Jones, a longtime offensive line prospect in the class of 2027, goes to Clemson. Colt Lumpras, an even longer time prospect and target for Penn State football. I feel like I've been seeing that kid for 6 years at this point. Was an Alabama commit, is now going to Michigan. Neither guys, both were targets for Penn State at one point or in this cycle and are now going to other schools. So how do you take that news, given where Penn State has numbers in the class at both of those positions? How does all this play out for you in the wash?
Yeah, that certainly softens the blow, having the numbers there. At offensive line, I think Carter Jones is a swing guy. So anytime you can get a swing guy, and I think there's probably a negative connotation with that. And is he a great guard, or is he a guard? Is he a tackle? Is he neither? That's
right.
kind of where we think about that. But that's the internet these days. So I don't think it stings as much because you got the guys on board, especially Tarawali. That's a guy I don't think we're probably talking about as much. And I think he's, probably more of a true tackle. But it definitely softens the blow when you go out and get a high upside athlete like that. Carter Jones is a guy that has been on the radar for a really long time. He's been up a couple of times and Penn State was in a good position after their visit. I got to give it to Ryan on this one. He nailed this one. He said that, if he didn't announce fairly shortly that Clemson could always come back into it. You always felt that, a kid named Carter Jones from Virginia, Carter Scruggs did the exact same thing last year. Is you go through it, and all of a sudden he seems like a Clemson kid. So I'm not totally surprised that it came back around to Clemson. A little bit surprised that it happened in the sequencing that it did. Same thing with Colt Lumpras, really, because you're looking at official visits, which are open through April through June. So we've been in official visit season forever, but it doesn't really hit the road until June 1st or I guess May 31st this weekend. So it's one of those ones where you thought, okay, got to a certain point, you can get to official visit season with these guys. Colt Lumpras more specifically than Carter Jones. I think Carter Jones originally had a June 4th announcement or something of that nature. So you take these ebbs and flows, but you kind of thought you were out of that window where guys were making decisions, because it's why wait now an extra week? Why wait 2 weeks?
Right.
Something like that. So that's where I'm going with that. Colt Lumpras, there's 2 tight ends in the class already. Penn State wanted Colt Lumpras. This is not a situation where they took Sean Curry and they're like, okay, well, Colt, best of luck to you, whatever. They still wanted Colt Lumpras. They still are going to look at tight ends. Parker Newman's kind of faded. His name is kind of faded since he came up and visited in the spring. But you still wanted to add to that group, because you look at what's on the roster right now, a lot of experience. We're very high in the tight end room for 2026, but there's a realistic chance that the top 3 guys on that list are not here come next year. You move down to Cooper Alexander, Brian Kordovich, and then you kind of got to restock in the class of 2027. Didn't get one in 2026. So I think that the big picture here is, okay, they've got 2 tight ends, they're fine, but they would actually still like a third. So it wasn't a situation where Colt Lumpras was or they went to Colt and was like, hey, sorry, your spot is filled, even if it's with a teammate. It would have been very interesting to me, because I know it happens at big time power programs, power high school programs, where you get 2 teammates committed or something like that, or 2 offensive linemen committed or something. I don't think I've ever seen 2 tight ends from one school go to a Power 4 program, so that would have been really interesting to see.
Yeah. With Lumpers and Sean Curry, this is an interesting situation, and I was thinking about it over the weekend. I'll just give you my opinion, and you can tell me if I'm on or off base here. Colt Lumpers feels like the guy Penn State would have recruited previously. 6'6.5", played wide receiver for them. I'd say he's more of the kind of all-around receiving threat and athlete. You look at the recruiting rankings, he's a 90 overall by Rivals. He's an 89 3-star. ESPN has him as an 84 star for people listening on the podcast version. He feels like the athlete that Penn State would have targeted before. In that offense, he's a slot receiver. He does not block. He does not have his hand in the dirt at any point that I could see watching the film of Sean Curry, keeping an eye out on him, knowing that Lumpers was on the radar. Curry feels like the guy that was prioritized because he is the 6'7" tight end, feels and plays a little bit like Gabe Burkle and Ben Bramer in the offense right now. Is that a fair assessment, do you think, Fitz, or is that just like Curry was ready to commit, so they took that guy, and then it became kind of Lumpers made the decision after that kind of fell out?
No, I don't think it's accurate, because the dangerous thing here is saying, okay, well, they prioritized this one guy over the other guy, and that's why they went and got him, which is not the case. Like if you read our coverage, or specifically Ryan, and Ryan's more apt to talk about tight ends in this cycle. He's been on, like, we don't split offense, defense, or positions or anything like that, but sometimes we just fall into a natural holding pattern of, okay, Ryan's covering tight ends this cycle. But if you read it, like, Parker Newman was a top guy. Colt Lumpers was a top guy at one point. Sean Curry was a top guy at one point. Cooper Terwilliger, before he committed, who we kind of forget about, was the top guy. Like, it ebbs and flows with who is the flavor of the day, week, month, whatever it might be for Taylor Mauser. And, there might be some feelings of, okay, he's my top guy because he's really good. And I think these guys are all really close. Like, I think they're all like very similar. If I'm ranking them, they're probably all 90 tight ends or 94 stars or whatever. But these guys are human beings. Like, these coaches are human beings. So, like, the feedback of, oh, this is my top guy, might also depend on, oh, he's my top guy, but I can also get him. And that's not a slight at Taylor Mauser. That is how all coaches figure these things out. Like, it's one thing to have a top, like, okay, Keemon Spell's a top running back target, right? Great, because he's wonderful, he's a 5-star, all that stuff. But, like, when you feel better about somebody, that certainly helps move them up the board. And it also goes back to their relationship with the coach. It goes back to their relationship with how they've handled the process. And this staff in particular, very big on those finer details of, like, hey, being a human being is important too. It's not always cut and dry, and it's not always a straight line. When you're drawing the graph of top targets here, especially with tight end, and I'd like Ryan to do this on paper because I'd like to see what it looks like. It's all
kind of like like the race of who the top tight end is week to week. Over time.
What I love is those time lapse things when they show you, like, how many national championships they won, and they keep going up. I can't look away from those. We need to do more of those. We got to figure out how those work. But you're looking at what I go back to what I said with quarterbacks. You're always being evaluated, and it's not just about, you play football 4 months out of the year. Some guys get spring football. That's great. You play 4 months out of the year. That's your tape, whatever. But things change. Like, evaluations change, athleticism change, strength numbers change, all this stuff changes. And that's why when you say something about, okay, well, how did this guy jump to a 4-star? They haven't played football in 5 months, 6 months. Yes, that's true, but it's also stupid because you're limiting yourself to, oh, we can only change people in this 4-month cycle, or there's more things coming out. And, you're always being evaluated, and that is kind of how this changes. Now, going back to the actual recruitments here, Carter Jones was a guy, not that Penn State was counting on in its class, but they felt pretty good about where they stood for a while there. And that changed in the long run. Again, credit to Ryan Snyder. He was all over that one, said Clemson was going to come back around at some point. I was like, yeah, probably. But the more you heard, the more that you thought Carter Jones would end up at Penn State. Didn't happen. So got to go out, and now you move on as Penn State, prepares for June, which involves official visits. It also involves camp season, and offensive line is a spot we've seen them offer guys at camp. Tight end is definitely a spot that we've seen them offer guys at camp. I went through the other day. Brenton Strange was a camp offer. Now he's a top 15 tight end in the NFL. Like, there are these things that where you can find these athleticism. You can find these these ascending targets. And that's what matters to me, right? Is when you're ascending, because this is going to sound awful disrespectful to Colt Lumpras, but he was a guy that turned heads as a freshman.
Yep.
That's not always good. Like, that's not always the best case scenario in the long run.
It was kind of an interesting conversation because we were thinking like that's not sustainable for somebody who's in 9th grade and is 6'6", but he's a rare exception of a guy who maintained that. And I think, his speed and everything, his athleticism caught up with his frame. A lot of times it doesn't. Like, you grew early and that's who you are.
Yeah, but Colt Lumpras is not Michael Barnwell. At the same time, you kind of wonder what he's going to be. I've said for the longest time, the first time I saw that kid, I saw an offensive tackle. Now, he plays slot receiver. He doesn't block, but I know that there are college coaches that think the same. So, like, I think that this kid is just one of those massive human beings that's going to continue to grow. Will he let himself grow into, eventually a 270-pound tight end or maybe a 310-pound tackle? Like, there's a lot of upside in doing that. You don't know. You can't take a picture of somebody's brain and figure out how they're wired. That's in that sense.
Yeah. Last thing here, just another quick thing from our news and notes. Penn State added another official visitor to the upcoming weekend. Just wanted to get your thoughts on adding somebody at this point. Caleb Cooper. Again, Ryan wrote this over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. Safety from North Carolina, I want to say. I apologize, I don't have it off the top of my head. What do you think of the just give us some of your highlights of this particular topic as we get into our main topic coming up in just a minute.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of hedging going on at safety. Of course, I think they felt great about where they stood with Gabe Jenkins until they didn't, and he committed to Colorado on his official visit. Caleb Cooper is interesting out of Providence Day School in Charlotte. He does not have a Penn State offer, but he has an official visit. He says it's an official visit. I'm still trying to double check that to make sure it's an official visit. You don't bring in a ton of guys without scholarship offers, so I could see that changing. But at the same time, that's notable to me that he's set up an official visit, but has not actually gotten an offer. So still looking at kind of the usual suspects there at safety. Of course, Gabe Jenkins is off the board, but Nair Crum at DeMatha is there. Cooper Onmont as well out in Kansas is still there. So it's I think it's just getting thinner, and they're spreading that net a little bit wider, seeing what's out there, seeing these guys that have Power 4 offers, and kind of making hedging is probably the best way to put it, I would say.
Yeah. Okay, so that's today's news and notes. Let's get into the second half of our show. But first, a message here from today's show sponsor, Liberty Lumber Products.
How's it going, Nittany Lion fans? My name is Justin. I'm born and raised in Pennsylvania, and this is my wood shop. We are Liberty Lumber Products. Come here, I want to show you a few things. So my company is now officially licensed with Penn State. So I want to show you the products that are now available at our online store. We now have some coasters that are available. These are handmade by our team here at Liberty Lumber Products. We have some very talented carpenters here. And we also have this cooler that's now available. So if you have any questions, you can reach out to us. Please follow us on our socials and check out what we have coming next. We've got some big things.
Use promo code PSUFans for 10% off at Liberty Lumber Products. They got a lot of great stuff and more on the way. It's just, I've been saying that for a while. There is a process of, like, they have to come up with a design, then they have to get it approved because they have the officially licensed logo and all that stuff, and Penn State has to say yes or no. So all of that is on the way for the summer and for the fall. So if you want to get your man cave, your fan cave up to code for fans, you can go check out Liberty Lumber Products. Also, want to remind you, if you want to read more about any of the conversations we're having here today, you want to read some of Ryan Snyder's reporting on tight ends, offensive linemen, Carter Jones, whatever it is, subscribe. BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. You get to join us for $1 for the first week. And then, if you want to keep going with us, it's 50% off for the first year. And I should mention this, the link to join is in every single video on this YouTube channel. You just scroll down to the description, you look for the link that says you can join us, and then you can get that deal if you're a new subscriber. Fitz, I'm working on getting a QR code for people so they don't even have to click anything. Like, you just use your phone if you're watching on your TV or your computer, and you take a screenshot, you use your, how to use, I don't know why I'm telling people, they know how to use QR codes. I'm working on that. So bottom line, join us at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. It's a great deal, and you should check out what we got, because I think we got a lot of great stuff. Okay, it is gut check.
It's gut check time.
Today's checklist, we're doing a gut check, literally.
America, it's time for a gut check.
wonderfully terrible in every single way. Okay, Fitz, time to see what you think. This is the question Penn State fans want to know. Will Penn State finish higher than 15th in the team rankings for 2027?
I'm going to go with no on this one. I have put them, I think, consistently 13 through 17. So I'm going to play the numbers game here and say,
okay,
like 15, 16 is probably right where they're going to be. You said above 15th. So I think that I'm going to go with no. You look at what they've got so far, and I like the class so far. It's just a matter of finishing through official visit season, and that's going to be what really determines where their eventual landing spot's going to be. Probably getting tired of hearing this from me, but explaining our rivals team rankings. Penn State 16th nationally right now, and that's like kind of where I expect them to finish. But if you look at how we do things, they use an average of, I think, Power 4 commits per class, so it's rated on the top 9. So Penn State with 20 commits right now, only about half of that class is contributing to the team ranking, and that's going to change. That's going to go all over the place right now. So 6 4-stars, 14 3-stars by the Rivals Industry rankings. And again, there's no trophy for being first or being wherever in late May. It does not matter. But I think that's kind of where you feel that that's going to come from. I think there are some guys in this class that will rise, but at the same time, you don't want to hang your hat on that's how Penn State's class is going to change. So looking at the group right now, I think there's a lot of upside there. Of course, hanging on to Jameer Dean, which, thinking back to when he committed, was probably not the conversation we thought we'd be having, but hanging on to Jameer Dean with Georgia lurking is going to be a big deal, and it's going to be, frankly, very tough to do. But you're looking at some pretty good players in there, but I'm just going to go slightly under that 16, so probably still in that 13 to 17 range. So, or excuse me, under that 15, so 16, 17, something like that.
So just to your point, Georgia is 18th right now. They have 8 commits, 1 5-star, 2 4-stars, and 5 3-stars. So, just on the math alone, they're going to add more players, and they are Georgia. So there's one school that has the opportunity to move ahead of Penn State. Some of the other schools here, Alabama, 24th. I'm just looking at, honestly, I'm probably just coming up with SEC schools. I'm just trying to think of teams that have money and prestige. Those two, are in the conversation. Missouri might have might make a push at some point. So there's just a couple of schools behind Penn State right now where they are. On the flip side, if Nebraska, something happens with the Nebraska's class, Penn State might find themselves, as you mentioned, where they are now, but with a couple of teams yet to make some moves, it does make sense there could be some jockeying ahead of Penn State, kind of like the recruiting rankings themselves. Like if a player is rated higher, they get a bump in the ratings. Somebody else has to come out of the on 300 if somebody gets into the on 300. And that might be how Penn State finishes. How does this work out where Penn State does finish in the top 15? What do you think has to happen there? Is it key recruits, or is it guys getting bumps in evaluation from the major recruiting services? Got you muted, Fitz.
I'm still reading these things in a different window, so that's my apologies. I think it's key recruits. Official visit season's huge. There's no getting around it. You saw what happened last year where Penn State's class was good. And then that's a tough one to swallow. So I would go with that. You look at the rankings right now, the rivals team rankings. I do think UCLA levels off. I think Nebraska levels off. Although Nebraska, is spending a decent amount, but it's so tough when you got to win, man. Like there's elements of the prior era of recruiting that are still, factoring in here, and you got to win. That's one of them. It's not going to change. So it's going to make people uneasy. It's going to, talking Nebraska, we've talked Colorado in the past. Is that a job that changes at some point? We will see what happens with that. But yeah, it's Penn State's finding themselves in an interesting cluster there. UCLA at 12. That's a new coach. Penn State at 16, Virginia Tech, obviously a new coach at 17, Kentucky at 19. That's an interesting one to me because that's a spot where, they can sneaky spend, and Will Stein has an offensive reputation that's going to bring in some guys as well. They've already done so with at quarterback. Ole Miss is fascinating because they do have spending power, but also they're going through a lot right now with that coaching change. And is Pete Golding the guy that's going to get them over the top from that? And, right behind them is Auburn, who is Auburn's fascinating to me, man, because that is a school that their boosters want to spend. They've obviously made the coaching change that they've made.
Yeah.
And think that they think that they're on level ground now. They think they're on stable ground, I guess. So we will see if that happens. But they're also in state with Alabama, and they trade quite a bit. Alabama, Auburn, the schools down there, they trade quite a bit. So we'll see how much they can jump. So in the grand scheme of things, I think Penn State not that volatile in terms of moving around in the mid-teens there.
Yeah, well, I mean, they got 20 commits, so they're pretty stable as these things rise and fall, as other classes catch up to them. The Penn State's just going to add, the strength they already have to this particular conversation. So we'll see how all that goes. That's kind of where I thought you were going to go with that one. So let's go to a different conversation about the class of 2027. Maybe this is a soft question, but it's something we've talked about as a potentiality and something I think that you mentioned they would like to do. So Penn State gets a second quarterback in the class of 2027. What's your gut say about that reality in the next 6 months?
My gut says no. It's always safer to side with the one quarterback class, and you're looking at a guy like Brody Brenneman, just got a Tulane offer yesterday. Just got a USF offer. I think he's a guy that continues to rise and probably gets out of that tier where he's going to be okay being a second quarterback. Now, I will say this: like in this day and age, there's less downside in being a second quarterback because you get there for a year, you understand what you are, and then you can probably still go to Tulane, still go to USF.
Yeah.
Now on the flip side,
or somebody else might leave on your roster. Like somebody on the roster might leave, and you might have an opportunity.
Well, I still think they add a quarterback. I just don't know that it's in the 2027 class because I think that they're pretty happy with Connor Berry right now in terms of what they went out and were able to find. And does lightning strike twice? You don't know, but at the same time, like, is that a possibility for 2027? I certainly think that they'll look. So Peyton Falzone, obviously, I think you and I have talked before. Is he a quarterback in the long run? Is he a quarterback at Penn State in the long run? I don't know. So we'll go from there. And Alex Mansky, of course, the wild card in all of this. Like if he's back and he's ready to go, which they hope he's going to be, does he show enough that do you think he's going to be their starter in 2027? You just don't know that yet.
Yeah, it does not help the situation. You get another freshman quarterback next year for next year. That would be a conversation about years down the line, and it just is one that it's a very tricky situation. Actually, Pete Nakos is coming back. We're going to be talking soon, and then we're going to have him on the show next week. He wants to talk about the quarterback situation. He wants to talk about Rocco Becht. He wants to talk football, but I think it's just a really interesting situation that even people on the national scale are monitoring about Penn State of you've got this year, 2026, and then 2027 is kind of a big question mark when you got a quarterback whole and a developmental program. Not like it would not be a big deal if this were a school that is routinely going out and paying market rate for a starting quarterback to come in and be the mercenary for 1 year. That's not really this team, and threading that needle is going to be really interesting. Okay.
Yeah, you didn't think that was going to, I mean, that's part of the reason you brought in 2 quarterbacks from Iowa State. Is to see if you could keep that train going, and I think that's what they want to do. Like I know that the data is saying, hey, go find an experienced guy that can win you football games. And that's not necessarily going to be the guy that's going to be the best pro prospect. But at the same time, like they want to develop that guy that can win games and be a pro prospect. They're a crazy idea, I know.
Right.
But I think that's just how they operate. And again, it'll save money in the long run. But at the same time, like there's a realistic like crossroads that's coming up here. And you just don't know where Penn State's going to fit in that mix of who needs a quarterback in 2027. How much is that market going to, or where's that market going to be set?
So this question, I think you've mentioned this, Ryan's mentioned this, so I just want to get your gut on Gabe Jenkins. By the end of the 2027 recruiting cycle, Gabe Jenkins is a Nittany Lion. What's your gut say?
I don't think so. This is one that's, gone back and forth, and you felt this winter and this spring that he was going to come back into the fold here. Colorado got him. Like that is what Colorado is doing right now. They're putting attractive compensation packages in front of players and players' families, and it's making decisions for them. And that's something that Penn State, number one, is not going to match whatever Colorado's getting. And if Deion Sanders is there, which is a conversation for somebody, for people more informed with his buyout, people more informed with his drive and determination, because like, his kids aren't there anymore. So like, it's going to be tough for him to, in my eyes, to stay there and sustain any kind of winning. But at the same time, like, Colorado was broke before he got there. Can they afford to fire him? I don't know. So to me, it's got to be Deion stepping out on his own right now. Maybe in a year or two that changes, but that's kind of where I see with that. So I'm going to go with no. I think Penn State's going to stay in touch there. Terry Smith is very involved in that one, as he is in Western Pennsylvania. But again, it's one of those examples where that kind of clout does not go as far as it used to.
Yeah. We'll see how.
And actually, there's a question in the chat that's probably more apt than this is Gabe Jenkins by 2029 at Penn State. Probably more likely than being at 2027. That's just how it's working these days.
How, and I know you don't know this, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, like how often is it that a player ends up at the school that was maybe number 2 on their preference list when they chose NIL as the reason to go somewhere else? Like, because, in the portal, Gabe Jenkins, I don't know what he's going to command in this fictitious future, but is that still a top priority? Will somebody pay for him? Because I feel like a lot of times we say that and then guys don't end up here. They go to some other school that's willing to pay again for a player out of the portal. But it is I think a fair question for a player in a position that can have some volatile playing time and can have some volatile value on the open market. It's not like he's a receiver or some other player position that we know has, kind of established hierarchical value in football.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally fair. I don't know that it happens as much because, you look at the priorities and you look at the way that some guys make that decision. If they make that decision in the first place, fully dependent on the money, they're not as successful. And that's kind of overgeneralizing some things. So like, is that second option still there? I think going back to the previous staff, this is not an NIL thing, but like Penn State tried to do the right thing in taking Nolan Rucci and Julian Fleming back in terms of like these guys, hey, you can always come home, but that's a dangerous double-edged sword and that's a thin line to walk. And they did that. And I think it gave people more of an opportunity to say, well, I can always come back to Penn State. Like there's a difference between like, we're here to support you and, oh, I can always fall back and go to Penn State. And I think that's kind of what came back and bit them in terms of what was happening with elite talent. Now, like I said, Rucci class of 2021, I think was Fleming class of 2020. So pre-NIL, but the profile, the high profile guys still felt that way. Wrote about it last summer and it was kind of like how, or I guess it was 2 years ago. Now, yeah, that all runs together, doesn't it? But you found yourself in a situation where you inadvertently became a fallback.
So let's get to this question. And I don't remember how I phrased it exactly. Which position has the biggest miss for the class of 2027? You can do that for now, or you can look into the future in December and say what you think the biggest miss is going to be overall for this class if you have a strong opinion there. But dealer's choice of where your gut goes, both on the phrasing of the question and the answer to the question.
Love it. I think defensive end is where you look at right away. You take a look at what Penn State's got right now. They've got Carter Blattner, and the board's not deep. The region is not wonderful to begin with, but at the same time, you've got to be able to cobble together something. You think back to a couple of cycles ago when the board wasn't that deep, the region wasn't wonderful, but you find a guy like Ivan Kemeju, makes you feel a lot better about your recruiting class. And there's a couple other guys that I think can still be players at the college level there in that cycle, but of course that all blew up. Anyway, you think about what Penn State is trying to do in the transition that they're trying to make. And defensive end, we've said it before, it's kind of split into two positions right now, where you've got the big defensive end and you've got the designated pass rusher. Penn State prioritizing, and this is by the way, this is sort of a Matt Campbell thing, but also it's a Danton Lynn thing. Like Danton Lynn wants these big guys that can stop the run, and then sort of filter them in there with those designated pass rushers, the guys who can get to the quarterback. So
can I jump in here? Just kind of discuss that a little bit. So I think a lot about like the Ravens of a couple of years ago in this conversation of what is the front and what are you trying to do? Think about it by down. So first down, big bodies, physical guys off the edge to stop the run who can still get to the quarterback. But then when you get to third down and you've earned the right to rush the passer, as everyone likes to say in football, then you can put whoever you want on the field wherever you want. Third down is almost an entirely different defense. Actually, it is an entirely different defense by package and by what you're trying to do. So you do have this opportunity to have these players. The best players are going to be able to play all 3 downs. They're going to be able to stop the run and get to the quarterback, whatever the play is. But that's, if you're going by the predictive model, first and second down, you have a much higher percentage of run on those downs, obviously, than you do on third down, even third and medium. So, that is the theory behind it of it's a multiple defense. So they need to be able to do multiple things. And on third down, everyone's a 4-man front. Like, that's the reality in football, is even if you run an odd front, even if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers of the last 5 or 6 years, when it's third down, TJ Watt, doesn't matter if he's standing up in a 2-point stance, there's 4 guys on the line of scrimmage and they're rushing the passer that way. So, that's kind of the theory, I think, in the team building perspective behind this modern football that is like, oh, are they an odd front? Are they even front? On third down, it doesn't matter. Everybody's a pass rusher.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. You take a look at what they try to do, and they have done it the past, and they've had to play out of necessity, bigger guys as sort of 3-man front. So like that, I think that kind of is where the Campbell side comes into, but like what they did at USC, and USC is special because you can go out and find like guys around in the West that are bigger. And we go back to the Polynesian thing. Like they're a bigger defensive line in general. So you can go with that. So the other thing here is that guys like Carter Blattner, maybe a guy like Elijah Guertin from Rhode Island, I don't think are going to excite fans because they are big defensive ends, because they don't have the twitch off the edge. And I love twitch off the edge. It's been very successful for Penn State, but those guys are going to be more appealing. That's why I love James Pace at DeMatha, who's not going to end up here. So like you've got almost 2 different positions here. Like Ryan said on the show, we used to do strong side defensive ends, weak side defensive ends. Penn State's actually recruiting like that right now.
Yeah. I want to talk about this. Just sit on this for a second, because I watched a really fascinating video. Do you know Brett Coleman, his YouTube channel? He was talking about...
I'm aware of it. I don't follow it. Yeah.
I haven't watched a lot of his videos either, but he put one out, I think it was yesterday, about the combine, or at least YouTube surfaced it to me yesterday, and it looked new to me, where he was diving into what the top pass rushers over the last decade in the NFL, what their metrics are, what their stats are from a build perspective. And it was really fascinating how he framed the conversation, because we talk about age, arm length, size, speed, explosiveness. And his point was the number one thing in the NFL that you need to have to win is power. If you do not have power, and it doesn't matter how tall you are or how long your arms are, if you're a one-note pass rusher, you will not have success at the next level outside of splashy plays. And I think that's a fair assessment. There's always these thresholds, right? Do you have enough of this? Do you have enough of that? And if you have 100% of one thing and 42% of another, like, you are going to be an unbalanced player. And I do think that in this recruiting conversation, if you're saying that that is correct, so we're taking Brett Coleman at his word that power is the number one thing. Micah Parsons is a stocky 255-pound, 6'3" defensive end with 31, 32-inch arms. Is not the prototype, but is successful. And it was specifically Ruben Bain being 260 pounds and being 30-inch arms, right? So can he be successful at the next level with all these outlier traits? If you apply that as correct, that power is the most important thing, you're going to find more power in bigger defensive ends as opposed to the speed rushers. So just as a devil's advocate argument about the bigger defensive end as opposed to the speed rushers. And I would even argue, if I'm going to continue this conversation, Abdul Carter was, he punched above his weight. Micah Parsons punched above his weight for his size as a freak athlete. And for that to work, you got to have some of those power traits that are maybe not indicative from your size in the conversation about what you are as a football player.
Yeah, and excuse me, Chop Robinson as well. Like, you look at
Yes.
the way that Penn State has had these quote unquote smaller defensive ends be effective, but they've also been effective against the run. Some guys have it both. They're you want a guy, maybe Abraham Sesse is that guy in terms of what. Because I'm trying to figure out, okay, who's in this box of big defensive ends, who's in this box of power rushers, and who's kind of in between that can do both. And if you can be great at both, if you can be Yvonne Kamaju like that, which not great at both yet, but I think he can be that guy. That's what's going to matter, because at the end of the day, okay, I understand what you're saying about the first 2 downs, and the league that they play in matters as well. Like, this is a big league. This is a running league. I did a breakdown on Davian Collins yesterday and tried to figure out the best receivers that Penn State was going to face this year. Hint, it's not as good as the running games that Penn State is supposedly going to face this year. So like, it's a very, I don't want to say tunnel vision, but it's very much tailored to the approach that Penn State's going to have in the Big Ten. Great. But at the same time, what do game changers do? Like, game changers, great. You can make a stop on first down and for a yard loss or something like that. But game changers are sacks, strip sacks, things that make a big difference. And I look at this defense, and that's where you wonder, and where you're projecting in the next couple of years where that's going to come from.
Absolutely. I don't want to diminish that at all, because I think that that's critically important. That's why what I just said about fans caring more about the sack numbers for the high school recruit, the high school defensive end recruits matter, matters to them, because like, those are the splashy things. That's what defensive ends, you want sacks, right? Receivers, you want catches, touchdown catches. You've got certain baskets that you need to fill at certain positions, and sacks is number one in people's minds for defensive ends, and that might not necessarily be the case for football coaches. Yeah. So Steven wants to know, how did he measure power? He did not have a direct measurement of power, but he did. Size was the stand-in for specific power. So mentioning Vic Beasley as a guy who's 240 pounds off the edge did not have a successful NFL career, as opposed to guys who are 260. So the average defensive end is 263 pounds, according to him. So that is the stand-in. Even if you're 6'1", if you're 260 and like you're built like a tank, then you have the opportunity to be strong enough to play in the trenches and to be an elite pass rusher. So there was no direct measure of power, but that's how he phrased it in the video. So you should go check it out. I'm pushing all the buttons here. I'll try to get the link in the description of the video, but if I don't, I apologize. Just make sure you check it out. It's Brett Coleman. Okay, so last question here with a graphic, and then I got one more follow-up that I didn't make a graphic for. Which position has the biggest win for the class of 2027? Somebody, UBC Calzone, was like, hey, any good news in this podcast? And so I think this is a good one to say here. Who's the biggest win for Penn State football, in your opinion?
I'm going to go, I think, that's a good one right now, because I think they're pretty well scattered, and I think there are positions that can get there. But I'm going to go with, we'll go with running back right now. Actually, no, let's go corners. You think what's out there. It's really funny because they all committed really early, and then we moved on to the next thing. So we kind of forgot about those guys. But Keyshawn Telfair is really good. You look at Samaje Robinson, a guy that's got potential to continue rising up at 6'1", 185. He's got the length and things like that. And hey, I trust Terry Smith. So I think that corner is up there, running backs up there as well. The pair of guys that they just got, Odo 10-7 at 220. I don't want to get in front of that. No. So,
especially the way he likes to run, like he uses that 10-7 at 220. That's the scary thing.
Exactly. So we will see how those guys develop over the next couple of years. Tight end can be thrown in there as well. Cooper DeWilliger is a really good one.
Yeah.
Sean Curry, a good one as well. So I think those three positions, which are, you look at Penn State's roster right now, kind of coincides with what they've got. I think they've got the potential. Guy says in the chat here, linebackers got the potential. Yeah, if they
that's what I was going to ask.
Tyson Washington, that's probably the position that has the ability to rise the most over the next couple of, next month or so, and we'll see what happens. And I'm very comfortable with the offensive line class. I look at what's out there in terms of guys that can be, guys that are probably at the bottom of the class right now, but can be players. Ryan Robbins, I'm a big fan of, and David Tarawali, I talked about earlier. That both of those guys have the ability to, push forward and go with that.
I will just throw this as a wild card out there, and I don't want to get any, I know I'm going to excite everybody in a bad way, but if Penn State keeps Jameer Dean, and if they are able to get Khalil Taylor or add another player that's left on their list, I like Landon Bloom, and I think if they were to add somebody to that, that would be the best receiver room we've seen, even considering the partial room we saw last year that had some really good players in it. I like the playmakers they have here. I think they complement each other really well. And if they're in position to actually land another guy, that's kind of what I would think of the receiver room. But yeah, linebacker was my answer for this one, and it was taken. So let me ask you this as our final question. Who's the best player in this class so far? Doesn't mean you have to be the highest rated, the guy that you think is best at football in the class of 2027.
I'm going to go with Keyshawn Telfair. He's on top right now, and I'm fine with that. Like I think that there are cases to be made for guys that can eventually rise. But in terms of the tape that he put out last year and the ability that he has, and of course, I think the position, watching Penn State develop cornerbacks and being successful with it over the last couple of, I guess over the last decade under Terry Smith, you got to go back into that comfort zone as well. So it's a cop out, but Telfair's on top of the rankings for one. Stanley Montgomery's your number two. I'll say this: I think Andy Paiva is ranked too low, and I think Stanley Montgomery is slightly too high. So those guys can meet in the middle. Maybe not meet in the middle, but those guys can maybe see some movement in that. And again, you go back to Jameer Dean. There's a reason Georgia wants Jameer Dean. He's really good. And again, I'd like to see him in person personally, just see how all this stuff matches up. Because again, we played this game a couple of weeks ago, T Frank, of what are we missing? Because we think he's really, really, really good. But like we're looking around, I was like, are we the only ones? And then all of a sudden we're not. So we'll see how that comes up.
Dean is my answer, but I've just said it too many times. Like I get bored of saying the same thing over and over again. So I'm actually going to go with Will Wood. I'm going to say that we're talking about who's best at their position right now. To me, in terms of like your upside versus what you do right now, it's kind of irrelevant when we're talking about this, but I'm trying to go with translatable skills that like markers that this guy's going to be good at football at the next level. I think the three guys to me that stick out are Aiden Gibson as an all-around running back, Dean as a number one receiver, as an explosive downfield threat, and then Will Wood is a really good quarterback. The mind for the game, the anticipation, his intelligence, his ability to command an offense and do multiple things within an offense. If he were 6'3", I think he would be easily a 4-star. So I understand the upside here when we're talking about what he is now versus how much is there to grow, but from the mental aspect, I think he's the best player in this particular class. So I didn't rank him as a future 4-star the last time when I talked about this over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. I just wanted everyone to know I think he's a really good football player. So I threw that one in selfishly so I could talk about that. Any final thoughts here? Do you have one for me? Do you have a gut check question you wanted to throw my way after putting you on the hot seat here for like 20 minutes?
No, I'm going to let you off the hook here. I can't think of anything. I'm thinking of like scheme fit or something like that. Like this kind of goes hand in hand with what we're talking about in terms of best player of the class. But is there a guy that jumps out to you that is sort of tailor made for what Penn State likes to do?
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Sean Curry. I think he is a clone of Ben Bramer. So I mentioned earlier Colt Lumpras as the receiving tight end in the Lawrenceville offense and kind of as between the two as a recruit. I also said in Sean Curry's video, he's a downfield vertical receiving threat that I think will be very valuable and will be if he continues to progress and does the things that Ben Bramer does, they'll have the ability to maintain this 13 personnel. If you have a 6'7" tight end that is a vertical threat and is a clutch player down the field catching, passes over his head as a large catch radius jump ball guy and a threat down the seam. You've got to have tight ends that make receptions downfield if you're going to play 13 personnel. You can't just have it all on be one player. There has to be multiple threats, and Curry can be that guy based on his talents that I've seen. And I think he's a better blocker right now, at least than the potential is he could be a better blocker than Bramer has shown so far. So there's a couple of guys that I think fit really well, but Curry to me is the guy that fits best as a gotta have it in the offense. That's a good question. I like that one.
No, I think it makes sense. And you take a look at, when we rank these guys as a national brand, you usually don't take scheme into account. You take a look at what they can be as a player because, eventually when they get to the NFL, you can be that guy. So we will see how that all comes together in the next couple of years. But like when we sit here and talk about these guys, we think about them in the context of them being Penn State players. And I think that makes a lot of sense with how that works. So that's why, a guy like Abraham Sese, like, screams Penn State defensive end in my eyes. Now, Notre Dame's had a ton of success there, and I think that they still lead. But at the same time, like I think that it would make a ton of sense for him to stay and play defensive end at Penn State because there's just a lot going for it in that sense.
I also think he could be that guy that has speed and power and could play all of the different positions up front. Like, I do think he would be a star in this defense that asks him to do all of those things. So yeah, if you're making a pitch about who would be the guy that fits that isn't in the class, that would be the one that we've seen out there. Of course, because 5-star defensive end, 6'5".
Yeah, it really.
Why wouldn't he be?
I just went there.
No, but I've been thinking a lot about that. I have been thinking a lot about that, looking at the D end board. We've talked a lot about it on the show, but something I mentioned yesterday, like I'm also concerned about what I've seen of the defensive ends out there that they're bringing in. And, I still, like, I don't, on the opposite end, Carter Blattner's film, I didn't feel like I got a good sense of who he is watching the full game film. And I'm trusting their analysis of Carter Blattner here, but I left feeling a little incomplete about what is the picture, because I kind of feel like if you ask me, I think he's a defensive tackle eventually at 6'5". I think that's more of where I think his skill set shows me on film right now. But at the same time, if they think he's a defensive end for what they want to do, they know better than me. So I'm not going to be like, okay, that's a total miss or whatever. There's development that everybody does. And at one point we thought Kemiju was going to be a defensive end, and look at him now. So, anything is possible.
Defensive tackle, but yeah, no, you're right on there. And the other thing here is, like, we talk about scheme fits and we talk about what they like to do. We haven't actually seen what they're going to do. Like, we know what they've done in the past and what they like to do. It's about tailoring your roster to the best thing that you can possibly do. And we'll see what Dan Lynn has up his sleeve. Very sharp guy, obviously, Penn Stater. But you're curious for a guy like Blake Benton in the class of 2027. It was like, okay, where does he fit into? We know where he would have been in Manny Diaz's defense, Tom Allen's defense. It's like, we know where these guys would have been. But at the same time, like, how can we shake that? And I think you do a better job of doing that than I do in terms of shaking what you've seen in the past at Penn State. But I do think the past at Penn State matters, because you are never moving this campus. Like, you're not moving out of central Pennsylvania. You're not moving out of the Northeast. And the kids that you get, while the names change, are very similar from year to year. The profiles and the projects that you get are very similar from year to year. How do you make the best of what you do? And you see that all over the country with, who does the best of, the crops that they can grow in their own backyard.
I have really enjoyed this show. I liked it. By the way, I was plowing through to the next transition. Speaking of crops,
well, thank you for one-upping me on that one. It got me off the hook.
So we have a lot of these shows where there's just so much news we have to get through. There's so many different things. I really enjoy these shows where we have a chance to stop and really talk about these things and kind of discuss and theorize or kind of play some of these things out. I'm really enjoying this show today. And there's a lot of people here in the chat. So if you're enjoying the show, like the video. That helps us out a lot. The number one thing to do, by the way, is just like watch the video, tell your friends that there's a good podcast that you know about Penn State football. If you're listening on the podcast version, you can always subscribe so that you get us in your feed every week. We do this show like 50 weeks of the year, 51 weeks of the year, and so we're always there for you. And make sure you like, subscribe, all that great stuff. But just enjoy it and stick with us through the summer, because we got a lot of good recruiting stuff and football stuff to talk about over the next 2 months, including your questions in the BWI Mailbag. So we're going to start our questions. By the way, if you got a question, drop it in the chat. There's a couple that I've highlighted in the chat so far, but I want to make sure if you got a question, drop it in the chat, and we'll get to that here in just a minute. I want to get to our featured question of the day. This comes from Poncho570. We've just spent a good amount of time discussing the class of 2027, the committed players, and I think this is a great follow-up to that. Of the players committed thus far, who has time to develop? And based on the roster, I'm assuming, who needs to be ready sooner rather than later based on the numbers ahead of them, where ideally that guy would contribute soon if he's able to do so. Fitz, who sticks out to you as a guy that needs to... Let's start with that second half. Who do you think, based on what you see on the roster, needs to be able to come in and do something in year one if possible, or maybe in year two?
Yeah, I don't think this question holds up as well as it used to in terms of like what you can do, because you can go out and find guys to slot in front of these recruits in the portal. And
Good point.
you know, I don't want to say whether they do that or not remains to be seen. This is still a developmental program, so they're still going to put a ton of resources into recruiting. But at the same time, like the
They
need
need time to develop, right?
yeah,
If you're going to be a
they
developmental
do.
program, you got to develop them.
Right. And they need to sort of slot where these guys are going to fit and figure out what the positions look like. So you take a look at the roster this year, and it's more balanced than you would think, given how this team has come together. Like, you think about if you're going to go get Iowa State guys, they're all going to be old guys. Well, they went out and they got a bunch of redshirt freshman offensive linemen, a couple of redshirt freshman receivers, some younger guys that have come along. So, kudos to them for the spending that they do in the portal. Like there's a misconception out here that they cheaped out in the portal. It's not the case. But they did not just put an emphasis on 2026. They've done so in 2027, 2028 as well, which I think is awesome. Like, I think that is not something that everyone can do. Like, not every staff is going to have, I don't want to say have the foresight, but have the fortitude to be able to do that, because they know if you don't win right away, that's going to have some sort of impact on the long run. So that's in one bucket right now. So, but you're looking at, corner, you lose Audavian Collins after this year. And you know what, if they go into 2027 with Jameer Joseph and Darius Dixon as their two starting corners, that's really, really good. That's one of the best corners. I think that could be one of the better corner tandems in the Big Ten, possibly in the country in 2027. But that's a long way. That's a long way from here. Tight end we've talked about before. You might lose three of those guys. Running back is one where you're going to cycle those guys. So a guy like Odo, a guy like Aiden Gibson could come in and play right away, or at least contribute right away. So you've got an opportunity to come through and at certain positions filter your way in there. Of course, you look at this offensive line class. I don't, see a guy that particularly could step in early. You don't want a guy that can step. I mean,
No,
you want a guy that can step in early, but you don't want to put a guy in that position where he has to step in early. So we've seen what Penn State has done, across the board on the defensive line, is go out and find experience. I think they continue to try and do that this offseason as well.
This is the part that I have a hard time with, because somebody asked me, could Andy Paiva contribute early as a guy who's 325 pounds already? So he's one of the strongest defensive linemen I've ever seen in high school. Like, he's legitimately one-arm tossing offensive linemen who are, not small when he's trying to get to the ball carrier. There's some things he does from a technique perspective that are raw, from what they want him to do, like knowing kind of some of the things they ask their players to do. It does not match, but if you can learn that if he's an early enrollee during spring football, I just have a hard time saying any defensive tackle is going to contribute early, especially if it's not in a Zane Durant situation, which is you're going to use your speed and athleticism to evade blocks instead of, hey, we want you to take on and defeat double teams from juniors and seniors on the offensive line. But if there was a guy that I've seen who might be able to do it, Paiva might be the guy, given, the conversation you just had of they've built a really resilient roster in terms of looking down the line, but they got two defensive tackles that are really good, and then a bunch of guys that we still are learning more about after this particular year with experience. So that popped in my head. I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's what you're asked to do, right? If you're a nose tackle, there's more that goes into it than just holding up the center. But at the same time, like, it's not as I don't want to say it's not as complicated, but it's not as necessarily as daunting as that. Now, the rule of thumb here is start at the football and then move out. The further away you get from the football, the more opportunity that you have to come and play right away. And that's, corner has been in there. Darius Dixon played a ton last year. Jameer Joseph probably should have burned his red shirt, but didn't last year. But receiver is the one that I look to. Jameer Dean, I think he can play right away. Like, it's go back to that. Telfair could play right away.
Yep.
Does that necessarily mean he's a starter? No, of course not. But like, you have the opportunity to come in and do that when you're further away from the football. And again, when you're younger, they're not going to ask you to do as much. And if there's, if they can find a guy that's got a superpower that can, run a 4.3 or something like that, send them on a streak. It's not going to be the end of the world. So, like, just move out from the football, and that's when you get your answers. So corner and receiver, maybe running back a little bit more, because you're not putting a ton on the plate. We've seen young running backs actually be more successful when they are young and naive and stupid, and they don't know what they're supposed to do. It's like sometimes that works out in their favor. That's what you got to get away from the football. So having a guy that plays head up on the football, that's a tough one for me. Just because it's so different, and he's 16 years old. Like he's still young for his class, I believe. And while he can bench press 225 pounds, I think 25 times he said, there's so much more to it than just holding up the guy in front of you.
Yeah, absolutely. As a guy that I think needs a little time or would benefit from a long tail, I'm just going to again throw out Blake Benton. I think his upside is exceptional. He's coming from safety. I know he's going to be a will, but like I've said before, I always want to steal a will and play him at Mike because I want to have everyone on the field be able to cover. I don't want to have to hide my Mike linebacker. His leadership, intangible things, I think his mentality, all lead to a guy who could be a defensive leader, could be a Mike. Now, depending on who else they get in this class, depending on what they have on the roster, that may never insert itself into the conversation. If you could have him be, a hyper-athletic will that can cover and blitz and tackle and all those things, great. But if you could play him at Mike because you got somebody else who's as athletic to play at will, I would love that situation. But that would be on the flip side of that question, somebody who with time to develop would find their best situation. This question here from Reddy. Oh, sorry. You want to follow up on that?
I'm just looking down the list, and we're covering pretty much everybody. But like Ryan Robbins is going to, I think, continue to develop and be a guy that can be a top level, a starting tackle. And we'll see how that athleticism transfers when he gets into full football mode. He's a really good basketball player, really good all around athlete. But when he gets into full football mode, then I think he can really take off.
This is from Ready 11. I think it's an interesting question from value to Penn State perspective. Do we think there's actual value for Penn State to play at Temple this year? Are the recruits and donors who will be exposed to Penn State that are otherwise wouldn't be because of this game, that would not be exposed to Penn State? Getting into Philly is a big thing for Penn State. It's been a big problem over the years, having Philly be a part of Pennsylvania and not a way station for players to go south. I know those are topics we've had here. So Fitz, do you think that's the case, or was this Pat Kraft wanted to play his old stomping ground school?
No, I think actually this was this set up under Sandy Barber? Like this has been on the books for a while now. So I think that there was a time when, yes, there was actual value in that in terms of, playing in Philly, getting around, not necessarily getting around prospects because you can't host prospects in an away game, but sort of reestablishing yourself there. I don't think it's there anymore. Like, I don't think that that's necessarily, I'm sure it's cool to play in an NFL stadium. That game's going to be at noon, by the way. And that's something. So it's going to be not as much about the experience, not as much about establishing yourself, because if you're trying to establish yourself as a top program in Pennsylvania, playing the number 3 program in Pennsylvania is not necessarily going to get you any further than you want to be. So as we saw a long time ago that we all like to put our memories, there is downside to it. Certainly is downside to it. I don't see Penn State in that trouble this year, but at the same time, I don't think the upside is there for getting into, quote unquote, getting into Philly or getting into the donors or, coming to them, since a lot of that money is in Philly. I just don't think it's there. I think it's scheduled in a bygone era where some of that stuff mattered a lot more.
So we got a couple of questions in the chat.
And sure. This is kind of where I was starting with this. I don't think Penn State is going to go as far into Philly under this staff. Like, we're talking the Epitaphs, we're talking, in Philly. Like, I don't think that is as much of a priority in terms of the way that they've done things. And, we've seen in the past some guys come through and some have been successful, some have not. But I don't think that that's a situation. I know that they want to be successful in Philly, no doubt about it. But at the same time, I don't know that that's going to be a target for them.
We have a couple of questions here in the chat. I just wanted to let everybody know we've answered the question multiple times. I've bothered Fitz and Ryan with, are they going to push their chips in for an elite recruit? Do they have enough talent to push for a national contention? We've discussed those on this show multiple times. I understand why you want to ask those questions, and we respect that. But we have talked about that quite a bit. We'll cover that a little bit later once we see the whole class and we put it all together. But we're going to take a break on that question for this particular week. Final thing we have here, Fitz. I don't have a great answer for you on this one, but I just was curious if you've got a kind of an insight on this. What's the modern schedule like for players on the team? How many are going home versus staying and training and being on campus? My basic understanding here is that they go home for a little bit, but they're here year round training on campus in the facility. Is this changed with NIL and the ability to go see different trainers outside of campus?
They certainly do travel more. We were talking to it's a player that I'm spacing on which player it was, but it was I think Britt Eskildson was going to go out and work out in LA or something like that. Like they're all working all over the place. Like it's going to like be part of the process right now, which I think is everywhere. How does that affect their schedule? There's a lot more online classes these days. You can do a lot more without being here. But they do like to have them here so that they can work together. They can do 7-on-7. They can do the informal team workouts that, kind of sort of set the stage for your season. So I honestly haven't not done one iota of looking into that. I do know that the remaining class of 2026 recruits are coming in a little bit later than they usually were. It would be this time of year. Actually, would have been a couple of weeks ago when we talk about guys that have graduated and like want to make that transition as early as possible. I don't think the staff is pressing that as much. I don't think that they're pressing to get guys here for the first summer session or for, I guess, that spring Maymester or whatever it might be. So like, I think that's been different. And a couple of the guys that I talked to in the class of 2026 are coming in end of June, which is how the things operated 15 years ago. It's not how we've seen it in the last couple of years.
That's funny. I would have said, oh man, they're getting here so late. I got here, August 21st is obviously I'm not an athlete or anything, but like most kids get to school at the end of summer, and it's only a couple of people. Like I had friends that were in early enrollees for the summer that went to like the spring and June semesters. That is very old school, considering that if you're not here in January, it feels like you're late. That's it for today's show. Any final thoughts? What are you working on this weekend, Fitz? It's interesting that there's like official visits, but like it's kind of a clear weekend from Penn State perspective.
Yeah, clear weekend from Penn State's perspective. I think Ryan's going to Under Armour in Baltimore. It's I think the final kind of camp. I don't know how well attended it's going to be for 2027 guys if they're taking official visits and stuff like that, but it should be quiet on the Penn State front this weekend. Going to watch some guys take some official visits elsewhere. A couple of big official visits in Florida. Elijah Guertin from Rhode Island's going down there. Zamar Tukes is going to go down there. We talked about him with the defensive tackle recruiting mostly in the show last week. So like there are guys to watch. I'm very curious to see how many decisions come out of this weekend, because it's like you take one and maybe you get that feeling, but also you got to test that up against a control aspect or something like that, take another. So very curious from the national landscape how many decisions are actually made coming out of this weekend and how many guys decide to hold out for June.
We've got some fun stuff coming up. I mentioned Pete Nakos is coming up next week. I've been working the phones to try and get some interesting national opinions on Penn State football over the next couple of weeks here in June. So make sure you subscribe here to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel so that you hear from some of your favorite voices across the college landscape. We're going to be trying to have that conversation with them this summer to get it, like I said, what do you think of Penn State? We've talked about all this ad nauseum all spring long. Now let's get some other voices here on the channel and also give Fitz and Ryan and Nate and Greg a little bit of a break. We'll be back next Tuesday. They're not like, oh, they're not going to be on the channel. Like, they're going to be here. We're going to be talking Penn State football, but trying to get some more people here on the channel. I'm Thomas Frank Carr for Sean Fitz. We will talk to you then.